December 24th, 1943, Bridgeport, Connecticut. When Senior Detective Wyatt Brennan Holcomb pushed open the door to apartment 42 on Fairfield Avenue, he didn't yet know that in 18 minutes his understanding of human nature would change forever. The apartment's tenant, 57-year-old librarian Cornelius Pritchard, opened the door himself, greeted the detective politely, and invited him inside. Bookshelves lined the walls with volumes of Hawthorne and Melville. A half-finished cup of coffee sat on the table. Everything seemed utterly ordinary. Everything except what waited in the back room. Wyatt Brennan remembered every second of that morning. How the librarian removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a handkerchief. How he asked, "You're here about the boy?" How he nodded toward the hallway and added, "Come on through. I'll show you everything myself." 17 years this man had lived in an ordinary 5-story brick building on a quiet street. 17 years he'd greeted neighbors in the lobby. 17 years nobody noticed anything wrong. But it had started 4 months earlier. November 1943 turned out surprisingly mild for Connecticut. Rain fell in cold sheets, turning the sidewalks slick and treacherous. Cornelius Pritchard returned from work at 6 o'clock in the evening, same as always. He carried 2 canvas bags filled with books. The Bridgeport Public Library on Main Street was reorganizing its cataloging system, and part of the collection had been temporarily approved for home inventory. "Evening, Mr. Pritchard," called out his neighbor Beatrice Aldridge from the 3rd floor. She was just taking her spaniel Pepper out for a walk. "Good evening, Mrs. Aldridge," Pritchard replied courteously, holding the building door open. "How's Pepper feeling?" "Much better, thank you. The veterinarian says she'll be completely recovered soon." "Wonderful news. Give my regards to Mr. Aldridge." Beatrice Aldridge smiled and continued on her way. Pritchard climbed to the 5th floor. Apartment 42, corner unit, windows facing the courtyard. 3 rooms, he lived alone. When he'd moved in back in 1926, he was 40 years old, and neighbors sympathized. A middle-aged man, educated but never married. Eventually, they got used to it. A librarian, a bookish sort, and those intellectual types don't always suit married life. Pritchard unlocked his door with his key, brought in the bags, carefully removed his shoes. The apartment smelled of old books and something else, a faint chemical odor that he carefully masked with air freshener. He hung his coat on the rack, walked to the kitchen, put the kettle on. No sound came from the back room. He poured himself coffee, sat at the table, opened a catalog card. The work required precision. Every book in its place, every classification code verified. Order brought calm. Order made life comprehensible. In the chaos of war, headlines screaming about battles in Italy, casualty lists growing longer, his library work remained steady, predictable, controllable. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Pritchard turned on the radio, same as always. They were broadcasting the latest news. Reports about production achievements at the General Electric plant, about the Allied advance in Europe, about tomorrow's weather. An ordinary evening in an ordinary American apartment. The next day, November 16th, there was inventory at the library. Pritchard arrived at 9 in the morning, as the schedule required. His colleague, Mildred Craven, was already sorting through the circulation cards. "Mr. Pritchard, punctual as always," she noted. "If only everyone worked like you." "Discipline is the foundation of everything," Pritchard replied, removing his coat. Mildred Craven had worked at the library for 23 years. She remembered when Pritchard first came to apply for the position. Back in 1926, right after moving to Bridgeport, he'd introduced himself as a widower. His wife had died from tuberculosis in 1919, he said, back in Rochester. His papers were in order, recommendation from his previous employer as well. He knew library science excellently. They hired him without hesitation. __quote _10__. Mildred had asked 6 months after his arrival. He answered. Mildred nodded with understanding. She never asked again after that. 17 years had passed. Pritchard was a model employee. Never late, Never broke rules, always courteous with patrons, especially with children. He always found time to help a schoolchild select a book for a report, explain a difficult passage, recommend something interesting. He had infinite patience with young readers, never talked down to them, remembered their names and what they liked to read. Mildred would say, Pritchard would answer. He never organized a club. On November 23, 1943, the first child disappeared in Bridgeport. 8-year-old Timothy Whelan didn't come home after school. His mother raised the alarm at 7 in the evening when it got completely dark. His father called all the classmates. Nobody had seen Timothy after classes. At 8 o'clock, they contacted the police. The desk sergeant filed a report. They issued a description. Began searching. They found Timothy 4 days later in an abandoned cellar on the outskirts of the East End. Medical examination determined cause of death: hypothermia. The boy had died approximately 2 days after disappearing. There were no signs of violence, but something else seemed strange. In his stomach, they found remains of good food: meat, bread, milk. Someone had fed the child before he ended up in that cellar. Timothy's father, Vernon Quincy Whelan, worked as a machinist at the Remington Arms Factory. 42 years old, 2 children, eldest Timothy and younger daughter Constance. She was 5. When they told him about the discovery, he didn't scream. He just sat on a chair in the morgue hallway and stayed there for 2 hours. Then he stood up, went home, and told his wife. Timothy's mother, Edith Laverne, fainted. An ambulance took her away. She spent a week in the hospital with a nervous breakdown. The neighborhood froze. In schools, they began conducting safety talks. Parents stopped letting children go anywhere alone. Police checked all suspicious individuals: ex-convicts, drunks, vagrants. Pritchard learned about the tragedy from the newspaper. Read the article over breakfast, sighed sadly. How terrible, Mildred said at the library. A child dead. How will the parents go on living? Frightening, Pritchard agreed. People need to be more vigilant. Probably some maniac. Indeed. Good thing the police are working on it. 3 weeks later, on December 15th, 9-year-old Vera Holbrook disappeared. She was last seen near the Railroad Workers Community Center. The girl was walking to her dance class. She never made it to class. They searched for Vera for 6 days. Found her in a wooded area behind the East End. The situation repeated: hypothermia, remains of normal food in her stomach, no signs of violence. Someone had kept the child for several days, fed her, then left her somewhere in the cold. Vera's parents, Leonard Ashford and Winifred Therese Holbrook, were railroad workers. Both worked at the station, he as a dispatcher, she as a ticket clerk. Vera was their only child. They'd been saving money to buy her a piano. The girl showed real talent in music. When they found the body, Winifred lost her mind. They placed her in the state psychiatric hospital. Leonard was left alone. He submitted his resignation, but management refused it. They said work would help him cope. He kept working, but his eyes became empty. The city began to panic. Parents stopped letting children out even during the day. Schools instituted a rule: only in organized groups under adult supervision. The police station received dozens of calls every day. People saw suspicious individuals on every corner. They checked everyone. They checked janitors, drivers, teachers, even beat cops. But they couldn't find the perpetrator. Detective Holcomb, assigned to this case, worked 18 hours a day. Wyatt Brennan was 45 years old, had been with the Bridgeport Police Department since 1930. He'd seen a lot. Domestic violence, robberies, assaults, the occasional murder. But children, that was different. When cases involved children, something inside him clenched into a painful knot. He understood. Whoever was doing this knew how to disappear, knew how to avoid suspicion, was organized, careful, patient. Holcomb told his partner, Detective Clarence Mabry, quote 24, quote 25, Mabry suggested, quote 26, quote 27. They began methodical work, interviewed everyone who lived near where the children disappeared, checked alibis, compiled lists. Pritchard's name appeared on one of those lists. He lived 6 blocks from where Timothy vanished, 3 blocks from where Vera was last seen. But when detectives came to question him, everything checked out. Yes, he was home those evenings. Yes, he could provide references. His colleague Mildred, his neighbors, the Aldridges. No, he didn't own a car. No, he'd never been in trouble with the law. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Pritchard," Detective Mabry said. "Just routine questioning." "Of course, officer. I hope you catch whoever's responsible. It's terrifying what's happening to our community." They checked him off the list, moved on. December 23, 1943. 8-year-old Archibald Quentin Thornton didn't return home after his piano lesson. Archibald, everyone called him Archie, lived with his mother Rosalind Edith Thornton on Maple Street. His father, Quentin Desmond Thornton, had died 2 years earlier from a heart attack. He'd been a postal clerk, 43 years old, left a small pension that barely covered rent and food. Rosalind worked as a seamstress at a garment factory that had converted to making military uniforms. She worked long shifts. The war effort demanded it, and she needed the money. Archie was a responsible boy, mature for his age. He took piano lessons twice a week at the home of Mrs. Waverley, a widow who supplemented her income by teaching music. The lesson ended at 5:30. Mrs. Waverley walked Archie to the door, same as always. "Remember to practice your scales," she reminded him. "I will, Mrs. Waverley," Archie promised. It was a 15-minute walk home. Archie never arrived. Rosalind came home from her shift at 7. The apartment was dark, cold. No smell of the soup she'd left simmering on the stove. Archie always turned it off when he got home, just like she'd taught him. She ran to Mrs. Waverley's house, her heart pounding. Rosalind ran to the police station. The desk sergeant took the report. Another child. Same pattern. Detective Holcomb felt something break inside him when he heard. 3rd child. He'd failed twice. Couldn't let it happen again. Quote, 35, he ordered. Quote, 36. They searched through the night, checked abandoned buildings, cellars, warehouses. Nothing. Days passed. 1, 2, 3. On the 3rd day, December 26th, the day after Christmas, something happened that changed everything. At 11 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock on Rosalind Thornton's door. She opened it, hollow-eyed from 3 days without sleep, and saw her son. Archie stood on the doorstep, pale, trembling, but alive. His clothes were dirty but intact, no visible injuries. He looked exhausted and terrified. Rosalind screamed and pulled him inside, holding him so tightly he could barely breathe. The boy cried, sobbed into his mother's shoulder for a long time. Finally, between gasps, he said, "I ran away. I found the way home." "From where? Who took you?" "A man. A nice man. He said he knew you. Said you'd asked him to pick me up because you had to work late." Rosalind felt ice in her stomach. "What man? What did he look like?" "Old, with glasses. He talked very politely. He showed me a note, said it was from you. I didn't read it carefully. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault, sweetheart. It's not your fault. Where did he take you?" "His apartment. It was upstairs, 5th floor. I remember climbing lots of stairs. He gave me food, sandwiches, milk. He was nice at first, but then..." The boy started shaking. "Then what, Archie?" "Then he locked me in a room. A small room, no windows, just a bed and a bucket. He said I had to be quiet. Said if I screamed, bad things would happen. I was so scared, Mom. So scared." "How did you get away?" "He left. Went somewhere. I heard the door close. I tried the room door. He'd forgotten to lock it. Or maybe Maybe he did it on purpose? I don't know. I ran, found the apartment door. It wasn't locked either. I ran down the stairs and kept running until I found streets I recognized. Rosalind called the police immediately. Detective Holcomb arrived within 20 minutes. He brought Detective Mabry and a police stenographer. "Archie," Holcomb said gently, kneeling to the boy's eye level. Quote, 51, quote. The boy nodded. Quote, 52, quote. Quote, 53, quote. Quote, 54, quote. Quote, 55, quote. Holcomb made a note. Forged note. Planned. Organized. Quote, 56, quote, 57, quote, 58, quote, 59, quote, 60, quote, 61. Holcomb's pulse quickened. Specific details. Verifiable details. Tell me about inside the apartment. Lots of books, everywhere, on shelves, on tables, old books with leather covers. He said he was a librarian. We talked about books for a while. He asked what I was reading. I told him about Treasure Island. He said that was one of his favorites too. A librarian. Holcomb felt something click into place. Then what happened? He made sandwiches, ham and cheese, gave me milk. We ate at the kitchen table. He was very polite. Asked about school, about piano lessons, about what I wanted to be when I grew up. Then he said he had to make a telephone call. Told me to wait in the living room. When he came back, his face looked different, harder. He said, "Change of plans. You're going to stay here a little longer." I said I wanted to go home. He said, "Soon, not yet." "Did he hurt you, Archie?" The boy shook his head. "No, he didn't hit me or anything. But he grabbed my arm, hard, and took me to the back room, pushed me inside, locked the door. I heard him walk away. I screamed for a while, but nobody came. Then I got tired and fell asleep on the bed." "How many days were you there?" 3, I think. He brought food twice a day. Sandwiches, milk, sometimes soup. He never talked much. Just opened the door, put the food down, locked it again. On the 3rd day, he said something strange. "What?" He said, "I'm sorry, this isn't personal, but I can't let you go. You'd tell." I asked what I'd tell. He didn't answer, just closed the door. Then, maybe an hour later, I heard the apartment door open and close. When I tried my door, it was unlocked. I don't know if he forgot or if he let you go on purpose, Holcomb finished quietly. Archie nodded. Maybe he changed his mind? Maybe he felt bad? Maybe, Holcomb thought. Or maybe he's done this before. Maybe other children who didn't come back weren't as lucky. Maybe they didn't find unlocked doors. Maybe he only unlocks them sometimes. Maybe that's how he justifies it to himself, gives them a chance, and if they don't take it, that's not his fault. Holcomb stood up, looked at Mabry. They started with the pharmacy. Feldman's Pharmacy on Fairfield Avenue. Brick building across the street, 5 stories, green door. They checked the building directory. Apartment 42. C. H. Pritchard. Holcomb felt his blood run cold. The librarian. They'd already checked him, cleared him. Quote, 79, quote, he said to Mabry. Quote, 80. Quote, 81, Mabry protested. Quote, 82. Quote, 83. They obtained a warrant within 2 hours. Judge Carmichael signed it personally after hearing Archie's testimony. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon on December 26, 1943, Detective Holcomb and 4 uniformed officers approached Apartment 42. Holcomb knocked. Cornelius Harlan Pritchard opened the door, saw the detective, saw the uniformed officers, and didn't even blink. "Detective Holcomb," he said calmly, "you're here about the boy." "Mr. Pritchard, we have a warrant to search your apartment." "Of course, come in. I'll show you everything." That's when Holcomb realized. Pritchard had been expecting this, had been waiting for it. They searched the apartment systematically, found the back room, small, windowless, exactly as Archie had described. Found rope coiled neatly in a drawer, chloroform in a medicine cabinet, a locked trunk under the bed. Quote, 88 Holcomb ordered. Pritchard produced a key without protest. Inside, children's clothing in various sizes, neatly folded. Boys' shirts, girls' dresses, all clean, well-maintained, like inventory. They found newspaper clippings about the disappearances, about Timothy Whelan, about Vera Holbrook, about children who'd gone missing in other cities, other years. Hartford, 1938. Providence, 1935. Buffalo, 1929. Rochester, 1922. They found a journal, leather-bound, pages filled with precise handwriting. Dates, names, details. The first entry was dated April 17, 1910. Holcomb opened it to a random page. Read, quote, 89 __. Holcomb felt bile rise in his throat. Quote, like a science experiment, like documenting specimens. He flipped through the journal, page after page. 33 years, dozens of children. Quote 91, quote, he said, his voice shaking with controlled rage. Quote 92, quote. Pritchard didn't resist, simply put his hands out for the cuffs. I knew it would end eventually, he said. I'm actually relieved. It's exhausting, maintaining the pretense. The pretense? Of being normal, of caring about library catalogs and weather and neighbors' dogs. It's all performance. 33 years of performance. I'm tired. The trial began in March 1944. It lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. The journal, the clothing, the clippings, Archie's testimony. The boy identified Pritchard in court without hesitation. Medical examiners' reports on Timothy and Vera both showed the same pattern. Held captive for days, fed regularly, then released in locations where they would die from exposure. The prosecutor was a man named Arthur Quinlan, 48 years old, with 3 children of his own. He approached the case with barely controlled fury. Why, he demanded during cross-examination, why feed them, care for them, then let them die? Pritchard, representing himself after refusing counsel, answered calmly, I didn't want them to suffer. That was never the point. I simply needed them for a while, to talk to have company. When I was done, I let them go. What happened after wasn't my responsibility. The courtroom erupted. The judge gavelled for order. You left children in winter cold without coats, Quinlan shouted. You knew they would die. I gave them a chance, Pritchard said. Some might have found help. It wasn't impossible. Archie found his way home, didn't he? Did any others find help? In 33 years, did any survive besides Archibald Thornton? Pritchard paused, looked at the jury. 6 others. Over the years, they found their way home. I read about it in newspapers. I was pleased for them. Gasps throughout the courtroom. 6 survived out of how many total? How many children, Mr. Pritchard? How many total? 43 children, counting Archibald. The number hung in the air. 43. More than the prosecution had even suspected. And you kept doing it anyway? Knowing most would die? I didn't kill anyone, Pritchard said. I never laid a violent hand on any of them. They died from circumstance, from weather, from bad luck, not from me. Quinlan stared at him. You're a monster. No, Pritchard said. I'm a man who needed companionship, who wanted to talk to someone innocent, someone who hadn't been corrupted by the world yet. I treated them well while they were with me, fed them, spoke kindly to them, taught them things. Then I let them go. What more could you ask? I could ask that you not kidnap children in the first place. But I was lonely, Pritchard said, as if this explained everything. I've been lonely my entire life. Children are the only people who still have honest conversations. Adults lie. Adults perform. Children tell the truth. The jury deliberated for 45 minutes. Guilty on all counts. The judge was Horace Carmichael, 61 years old, a grandfather himself. He sentenced Pritchard to death. Mr. Pritchard, Judge Carmichael said, I've been on the bench for 27 years. I've seen murderers, thieves, rapists, every kind of criminal imaginable. But never have I encountered someone who commits such evil while maintaining such complete detachment from the humanity of his victims. You speak of these children as if they were books you checked out from your library, temporary companions to be returned when you were finished. You are, without question, the most dangerous individual I have ever sentenced. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court will not. Pritchard showed no emotion, simply nodded, as if accepting an overdue library fine. While awaiting execution, Pritchard agreed to several interviews with police psychiatrists. They wanted to understand how someone could commit such crimes while living a completely normal public life for decades. Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, chief psychiatrist at the state hospital, interviewed Pritchard 6 times. His notes became legendary in criminal psychology circles, studied for decades afterward. Subject displays no empathy whatsoever, Dr. Kendrick wrote. When asked how he felt about the children who died, he responded, I felt disappointed. I would have preferred they survive. But I understood the risks, and presumably they did too. No guilt, no remorse, complete emotional detachment. Subject views children as objects of interest, not as human beings. When pressed on this, he compared his actions to collecting butterflies. You admire them for a time, study them, then release them. That some die in the process is regrettable but acceptable. He genuinely cannot understand why this comparison horrifies people. Subject's public persona is entirely constructed. The polite librarian, the courteous neighbor. These are roles he plays consciously and skillfully. He understands what behavior is expected and performs it flawlessly. Underneath, there is nothing. No genuine emotion, no authentic connection to other people, just calculation and performance. When asked why he confessed so readily when arrested, he said, the game was over. The boy escaped and remembered details. Continuing to lie would be pointless and inefficient. I respect efficiency. Note the language, the game. This is how he views human lives, as pieces in a game he was playing. Subject admits to selecting Bridgeport specifically in 1926 because it was large enough to provide opportunities, but small enough that a quiet librarian wouldn't attract attention. Chose the library profession deliberately because it provided access to children while maintaining a respectable image. Every aspect of his life for 17 years was designed to facilitate his crimes while appearing completely normal. Most disturbing. When asked if he would do anything differently, he said, I would have been more careful with locks. Archibald's escape was my only real mistake in 33 years. Otherwise, my system was nearly perfect. No recognition of moral wrong, only tactical error. He views being caught not as justice, but as a failure of methodology. Dr. Kendrick concluded his report. Subject meets all clinical criteria for psychopathy. Recommend execution proceed as scheduled. Subject cannot be rehabilitated because he does not recognize that anything is wrong with his actions. If released, he would resume his activities immediately. He stated this directly when asked. Cornelius Harlan Pritchard was executed by electric chair on August 15, 1944, at the Connecticut State Prison in Wethersfield. He was 58 years old. His last meal was modest: toast, coffee, and an apple. He ate methodically, reading a book until the warden came for him. His last words, spoken to the witnesses assembled, were, I regret the inefficiency of my methods, but not the actions themselves. I would do it again, given the opportunity. Goodbye. No one claimed his body. He was buried in the prison cemetery, unmarked grave. The aftermath rippled through Bridgeport for years. The neighborhood on Fairfield Avenue changed fundamentally after the case. People became cautious in ways they'd never been before. The building installed a new security system. Tenants had to buzz visitors in, and a logbook tracked who came and went. Parents organized neighborhood watch groups that patrolled playgrounds and school routes. Beatrice and Harold Aldridge moved away 6 months after the trial. Couldn't bear living in the building where they'd exchanged pleasantries with a monster for 17 years. The friendly conversations about weather and dogs now felt contaminated, violated. Beatrice said before they moved. Detective Holcomb told her. They sold the apartment to a young couple without children and moved to New Haven. Apartment 42 was sealed immediately after the arrest. For a year it sat empty, padlocked, while the city debated what to do with it. Eventually, they decided to convert it into storage for the public library system. Documents, old catalogs, rare books. Symbolic and practical. The librarian's apartment becoming a library annex. Mildred Craven retired early from the library in 1945. She was only 52, but she couldn't continue working there after learning the truth. Every time she saw children coming in for books, she remembered Pritchard. How he talked with them, helped them, smiled at them. How she'd thought he had such a gift with young people. I recommended him, she told friends. When parents asked for book suggestions for their children, I'd say, "Ask Mr. Pritchard, he's wonderful with kids." I sent them to him. Oh God, I sent them to him. She died in 1963 from a stroke. Friends said she never fully recovered from the guilt. Archibald Thornton grew up, finished school with good grades despite the trauma, attended Yale University on a scholarship studying engineering, married at 23 to a kind woman named Dorothy. They had 2 children, sons Victor and Marshall. Archie didn't remember much from those 3 days in captivity. His mind protected itself by erasing traumatic memories. But some things remained. Permanent scars on his psyche. Fear of enclosed spaces. He couldn't ride in elevators without panic attacks. Distrust of strangers who were too polite, too helpful, too interested. Nightmares that persisted into his 40s. Dreams of locked rooms, of footsteps outside the door, of being abandoned in cold darkness. He taught his children to be careful. Explained that you can't go with strangers, even if they look nice, even if they speak politely, even if they say they know your parents. __quote_134___. His eldest son Victor asked when he was 7. Archie answered. He never explained further, never told his sons the full story until they were adults. Rosalind Edith Thornton, Archie's mother, lived to 81 years old. Until her last days, she remembered that morning when her son knocked on the door after 3 days of thinking he was dead. Remembered how she held him, how she sobbed, how she thanked God with every breath. She died in 1984. Before dying, she told Archie, "Thank you for being strong, for surviving, for finding your way home. You saved yourself, and I've been grateful every day since." The parents of Timothy Whelan never recovered from their loss. Vernon Quincy started drinking 6 months after the trial ended. He'd go to the cemetery every evening after work, sit by Timothy's grave and drink until he couldn't walk straight. Declined slowly but irreversibly into alcoholism. Died in 1951 from cirrhosis of the liver, only 49 years old. Edith Laverne outlived her husband by 2 years. She visited Timothy's grave every Sunday without fail, bringing flowers even in winter. She died in 1953. Their younger daughter Constance grew up in a house heavy with grief. She never married, never had children, afraid of loving something she might lose. The parents of Vera Holbrook divorced a year after the tragedy. Neither could look at the other without seeing their daughter's face. Winifred Therese never left the psychiatric hospital where they'd placed her after finding Vera's body. She died there in 1957 from a heart attack, still believing in her delusional moments that Vera was coming home soon. Leonard Ashford moved to Boston, started a new family, had 2 more daughters. But he never forgot Vera. Kept her photograph on his desk until the day he died. Before dying in 1979, he requested burial next to Vera in Bridgeport, leaving his second family to bury him far from their home. Detective Wyatt Brennan Holcomb retired in 1965. By then, he was chief of the Criminal Investigation Division for Fairfield County. Over his career, he solved hundreds of cases, received numerous commendations from the mayor, the police commissioner, the governor. But the Pritchard case remained his defining moment. Not because it was the most complex. It wasn't. Once Archie provided details, the arrest was straightforward. But because it changed him fundamentally. Changed how he viewed people, his profession, the nature of evil itself. He frequently lectured at police academies across Connecticut and neighboring states, would stand before rooms of young recruits and tell them, "The biggest mistake you can make as a detective is thinking a criminal looks like a criminal. Thinking evil has a face you'll recognize. No, evil can look like a librarian, like a doctor, like a teacher, like your neighbor who holds the door and asks about your dog. Appearance is a mask. Image is a construction. Your job is learning to see behind the mask. Notice inconsistencies. Analyze details. Follow evidence, not impressions. And never, hear me, never eliminate someone from your suspect list just because they seem respectable, because they're polite, because they have a good reputation. We cleared Pritchard initially because he seemed like a harmless old librarian. That mistake cost lives. Holcomb died in 1978, lived to 80 years old, buried with full honors, served his community for 35 years, earned deep respect. At his funeral, his son Douglas said, "Father spent his life protecting children. He considered it his sacred duty, especially after the Pritchard case. That case changed him, made him harder on criminals, less willing to accept easy answers. But it also made him gentler with victims, more patient with witnesses, more willing to believe when children spoke up. He understood their fear, he understood their courage, and he did everything in his power to make sure what happened in 1943 never happened again on his watch." More than 75 years have passed since those events. Most participants are long gone now. Archibald Thornton died in 2001. He was 66 years old, early heart attack, just like his father. Left 2 sons, 5 grandchildren. His family knew the story, knew what he'd survived, remembered his lessons about caution, about trusting carefully, about paying attention. Beatrice Aldridge died in 1989. Harold Aldridge in 1992. The building on Fairfield Avenue still stands. Apartment 42 is no longer library storage. People live there again. A young family with a daughter. They don't know their apartment's history. The landlord didn't tell them. Why would he? It was 75 years ago. But old-timers remember, sometimes tell new residents, usually after they've lived there a while. Some move out immediately upon learning. Others stay, believe the past doesn't contaminate the present, that an apartment is just an apartment. The Pritchard case became part of Bridgeport's dark mythology, part of Connecticut's criminal history. People speak of it in hushed tones when discussing how evil can hide in plain sight. Use it to teach children caution without teaching paranoia. See, parents say, you can't always trust someone just because they look nice or talk politely. Remember the story of the librarian. 43 children over 33 years, and nobody knew. Be careful. Be smart. Trust your instincts. And children, remember. What lessons emerge from this story? First, evil doesn't necessarily look evil. It can be polite, educated, quiet. It can greet you every day and remember your name and hold the door. The mask of normalcy is the most effective disguise ever invented. Pritchard understood this instinctively, built an entire life around appearing unremarkable. Second, trust must be thoughtful, not automatic. You can trust people, but trust should be earned and verified, especially regarding children. A stranger's politeness isn't reason to let your child go with them. Good reputation in the community isn't absolute guarantee of safety. Verify. Question. Check. Third, details matter more than impressions. Archie remembered specific, verifiable details. Apartment 42, 5th floor, courtyard windows, Feldman's Pharmacy. Those details enabled identification when vague descriptions wouldn't have. The detective didn't dismiss a child's testimony as unreliable, but verified it systematically. Attention to detail saves lives. Fourth, the system must be genuinely vigilant, not just procedurally compliant. When police checked Pritchard superficially and cleared him based on a minimal alibi, he got opportunity to continue. When they asked, "Were you home that evening?" instead of, "Can you prove you stayed home all evening?" they missed the truth. Thoroughness matters. Perfunctory approaches to investigation enable criminals. Fifth, silence helps perpetrators more than anything else. 6 children survived over 33 years but stayed silent from fear or shame. If even one had spoken earlier, how many lives could have been saved? Silence from fear is understandable. Children were terrified. But that silence allowed evil to continue for decades. Creating environments where children feel safe reporting becomes crucial. Sixth, society bears collective responsibility. For 17 years in Bridgeport alone, people saw Pritchard daily, worked with him, lived near him. Nobody asked themselves, "Is everything okay?" Nobody noticed anomalies. Not because there were no anomalies. Mildred later remembered he never had visitors, never mentioned family, never took vacations. But people didn't pay attention because it was easier not to. Because questioning a polite librarian felt paranoid. Because everyone wants to believe their community is safe. The story of Cornelius Pritchard is a story about how a monster can live among people for 33 years without arousing suspicion. How the mask of ordinariness protects a criminal better than any elaborate scheme. How the most terrible dangers often come not from dark alleys, but from familiar, calm, ordinary interactions. 17 years he lived in an ordinary building in Bridgeport. 17 years he greeted neighbors in the lobby, talked about weather, asked about their pets. 17 years nobody noticed anything wrong. Until one boy survived and found his way home, and told the truth. This story is based on actual methods and behavior patterns of serial criminals studied by criminologists and psychologists over decades. Names, dates, and specific circumstances are fictionalized. Material is presented for educational purposes, to demonstrate the importance of vigilance and attention to detail, especially regarding child safety. None of the described events contains graphic details of crimes. Focus is placed on psychology, investigation methods, and social consequences. If you or your loved ones have been victims of crime, contact law enforcement authorities immediately.